All right, there we go. I think we're rolling. All right, everyone, let me introduce our wonderful guest speaker for tonight. Val Swisher is the founder and CEO of Content Rules Incorporated. She is a well-known expert in content strategy, structured authoring, global content, content development, and terminology management. She believes content management should be easy to read, cost-effective to create and translate, and efficient to manage. Same here, personally. Her customers include industry giants such as Google, Cisco, Visa, Facebook, Microsoft, and Juniper Networks. Her fourth book, The Personalization Paradox, Why Companies Fail and How to Succeed at Creating Personalized Experiences at Scale, will be released this year by XML Press. She's on the advisory board for the Technical Communications Program at the University of North Texas. When not working with customers or students, she can be found sitting behind her sewing machine working on her latest quilt. And apparently she also makes a mean hummus. Wish I could try that, but well, I'll wait till after the apocalypse. In either case, I can't talk. In any case, everyone, please welcome our guest speaker tonight, Ms. Val Swisher.
Gee whiz, gee whiz. Thank you so much. So before I start, how much time do I have? Because I didn't have an agenda. What time do you want me to go until?
If we're going by the schedule, you've got about an hour and 15 minutes. If you can take as much or as little of that as you want.
All righty. I don't think I'll need an hour and 15 minutes, but I am happy to answer questions. So we will go ahead. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight, and thanks for inviting me to your meeting. As you just heard, my name is Val Swisher, and I am the founder and CEO of Content Rules. And I do not have any slides about me because I thought that might be obnoxious, but I'm happy to talk all about myself if you want me to. But what I'm really here to talk about today or tonight is something that I call the holy trifecta of global content success. And it's a topic that, it's actually three topics, as you might have guessed. And it's three topics that I've been talking about for a really long time. And I finally decided that I needed to connect all of the dots for people in terms of why these three topics are so important. And we will have time for questions at the end, so please feel free to jot them down as we go. So the three technology areas that I want to talk about and how they intersect are structured authoring, terminology management, and translation memory, because each one of these things is great on its own. I mean, if you could only have one of them, that's great. But together, the whole is equal to more than the sum of its parts. So when you have structured authoring and terminology management and translation memory, and they are all operating in sync, there's a magic that happens both in your writing process and all the way through your translation process that is extremely worthwhile if you can get these three technology areas to converge. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about structured authoring. Did you just lose me? Hello?
No, you're there. We can hear you.
Am I here? Okay,
You're fine, you're fine.
Oh, okay. All of a sudden, Zoom started spinning in my screen. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so we're going to talk about each one of these areas. And let's start with structured authoring. And you guys probably know all about this, so just bear with me while I go through.
Hold on a moment. I think you did end up losing your slideshow, Val.
I'm sorry?
We lost the slideshow presentation for some reason.
You can't see my slides?
Not anymore. It was there before. Can you try to share screen again?
Okay, hang on a second. I think that my system, we're in the middle of the power outage here, so I'm using a backup generator. So things are not things are not going quite as well as I would like. Let me just log back in here. So sorry. You know those PG&E automatic power shutoffs.
Oh, I hate that. us.
Yeah. So we're in the middle. We were supposed to get our power back at 7 o'clock, but it did not happen. Okay, hang on 1 second. Let's see. Okay. How about, let me, I'm getting there. I am almost there. This is only happening because you're recording. If you weren't recording, then this would be absolutely fine. So, yes, it would. All right, here we go.
That's the theory of resistentialism, that all the machines are against you.
Okay, how about now?
Yep, it's starting up. It'll be fully loaded in just a second.
Okay. Are we better?
Started screen sharing, but I can't see you.
Yep, it's up. We're good.
You can see. Okay. Gosh, I apologize.
You're fine, Val. You're fine.
I'm blaming PG&E. Okay, so let's talk about structured authoring, which I think you guys probably know quite a lot about, but we'll start there anyway. So way back when, in the beginning, when we had typewriters, we created content by starting on page 1 and going all the way straight through to page 300 or wherever it was that we were finishing. So we were creating a big monolithic block of content that perhaps was divided into chapters or sections or whatever. But the main thing is that we had separate content for every use. And whether it's using content, creating separate content for different departments, or creating separate content for different models of the same device, whatever we were writing about, it was copy, paste, tweak, and we started at page 1 and we went all the way through. And this is called unstructured content, and a lot of companies still create content this way, unfortunately, but this is, historic. And that also meant that when we translate content, that every time we create a new piece in a monolithic block, we send the entire monolithic block to translation, which is very expensive and very time consuming. Even if they don't have to translate most of it, you're still paying a certain amount because you've sent them these extra pages. So it was very inefficient. And along came structured authoring, which basically is creating content in small chunks. Sometimes they're called components. Sometimes we call them topics. Sometimes we call them chunks. And then reusing these content chunks wherever we need to. And I can reuse the same content in training materials and documentation, or your knowledge base and documentation, or all three, or heaven forbid we share content with marketing. It's actually possible. I know it doesn't seem possible, but it's possible, right? So I create these different pieces of content, and I do this because I can produce way more deliverables when I write it one time and I use it in many places, right? Reusing content is great. I can create many more deliverables. It also means my deliverables are more consistent because I'm using the same content over and over again. So things become more consistent, right? And because of the nature of structured authoring, the format is separate from the content. So I'm no longer caring about how the content looks. The format of the content is married to the raw content much later on in the publishing process. So that means I can do multi-channel, or sometimes it's called omni-channel now, publishing. So I don't need to create a different set of content for an iPad versus, a desktop or laptop, etc. So what happens in structured content is that I have all these small topics, chunks, components, whatever you want to call them. I store them in a component content management system, and that's where I store them so that I can create, store, update, translate one time for every content element, and then I can reuse them as many times as I want in whatever deliverable I'm going to publish, whether it's HTML or a PDF or training or an app or a slide deck or whatever it is. So I've got this really lovely structured content ecosystem, and the nature of the way I do things and the way it looks changes. And this is a diagram of an ecosystem for structured content environment. So again, we have these small chunks of content, and if we're in Ditto, we call them topics. And we have a system called a taxonomy that allows us to organize these chunks of content, because I really am going to need to know where they are so that I can get to them again. I'm going to need to have a good organization for them, and that's in the CCMS. And I also have metadata. So all of my little chunks are tagged with a variety of metadata depending on the company, and again, so that I actually can find them later. They might also be tagged so my customers can find them later, but at the moment, I'm caring about tagging them so that I, the writer, can find them later. All of this is stored in the CCMS, and when I go to publish to my different outputs, they go through a publishing engine, and that's where they're married to a variety of style sheets, and they're eventually output to whatever it is I need. So I can take the same content and I can adapt it to all these different outputs. So now I've got consistency in my outputs, and I've decreased the cost of creating them, and I've decreased the time it's taken to create them. And I'm also decreasing the effort you need to translate them. So instead of sending everything to translation, I am now only sending small pieces of content to translation, whether they're new or updated. And the translations are usually stored in the CCMS with the source. So I have this nice system of small pieces of content that can be mixed and matched, multilingual, that is efficient, faster to create, cheaper to translate, and it's all wonderful, and we're all doing the happy dance, and life is great. Except we have a few problems that we've actually ignored when we do this. So here we have a button. And if you're a technical writer and you're writing some instructions, you need to tell your user what to do with this button. And there's lots of things I can do with the button, right? I can click OK, I can click on OK, I can click on the OK button, I can click the button, press the button, tap the button, select the button, tap on the button. There are something like 20 some odd ways to simply say click OK or select OK. So we have a problem when we go to mix and match components that have been created even by the same person, but let's just talk about creating them with different people. And we have not all agreed on what we're doing with this button. This is a problem. And it's a problem for readability. Now, granted, click OK will we're probably, if we mix these up, we're probably not in terrible shape. But it's also a problem in translation, right? Because if I said click OK and you said select the OK button, oh, we've got a translation expense that we should not have had. And multiply the number of words by 48 or 72 languages, and it starts to add up. Even if it's 15 cents a word, it starts to add up. So we need to manage source terminology. And it is my opinion and experience that if you are in a structured environment and you do not manage your source terminology, you're actually going to create more problems than you solve. So let's see why this is. So here's Fido. And we could call Fido all kinds of things. Fido could be a dog, a canine, a puppy, a pooch, a snickerdoodle, a hound, whatever. This is Fido. And let's just say that 4 of us were going to be writing 4 different topics about how to take care of Fido. And one of us wrote an entire topic on how to walk the dog. And someone else wrote an entire topic on how to train the canine or brush the pooch or feed the hound. And we went to output. We're going to take these 4 nice little chunks. They're beautiful, they're clean, right? Nice little chunks, and we output a PDF or a website or an app or something about Fido. Well, your user may or may not know that a canine and a dog are the same thing. They may not know that. And I can tell you that most of the time, the stuff that we're writing about is much more complicated than taking care of Fido. But if I can confuse you with Fido, I can super confuse you with the kinds of things that we write about. So it's really important to manage your terminology. It's really important to manage it. I just can't emphasize this enough. This is the view from a terminology management system. And if you look at what we have here, you can see that I, being the terminologist, have decided that dog is the preferred term. So we should always use the word dog. All of us are going to use the word dog all the time. All the time. We're not going to use canine. That's deprecated. Nope, not allowed. We're not going to use hound. Not allowed. Pooch is not allowed. Puppy is allowed because sometimes feeding a puppy can be different than feeding an adult dog. So we're going to allow puppy, making sure that people understand when to use puppy. Don't use puppy when you're talking about a 15-year-old dog. That's not a puppy. So I decide which of my terms I'm going to prefer or admit or deprecate. And as you can see in this particular screenshot, I also have additional languages. So I've got French, and that's preferred, and Spanish is currently proposed, meaning somebody has to approve that we're going to use this translation for it. But in other words, I am managing what my authors use for their terms. So now I'm always going to walk the dog and feed the dog and brush the dog and train the dog and try to get the dog to not sleep on my bed because he's 90 pounds. All of these things I'm going to do with the dog. I do have a 90-pound dog named Moose, and he does sleep on the bed. In addition, I get to store, if I want to, my translated terms with my English terms, if I want to. I'll tell you, most companies don't do this. Most companies leave the terminology translation in their terminology management system. But it is also possible, depending upon the software where you're using to manage your English source terminology, to store your translated terms there as well. Okay, so just to recap, structured content is great, right? We're not writing in monolithic, huge blocks. It's small, it's componentized, and the whole goal of structured content is to mix and match so that I can create more outputs and different outputs and make them look all different ways. And I can have 30 writers, and I can just take, you know, this topic that this person wrote and that topic that this other person wrote, and I can just put them together in whatever order I need them on the fly, boom, publish it, and it's beautiful. And it's only beautiful if we all call a dog a dog. We have to agree. And I will tell you, having done this for more years than I'm going to admit, most companies do not do this. They don't even get it. I come in and I'm like, you realize, of course, that you've put all these topics together and nobody can understand a thing you've written because you have not standardized even on the name of your product. Hello. And it happens all the time. And nobody thinks about it because they figure terminology, it's like, I don't know, kumbaya. It's like we sit down and we have a Vulcan mind meld and we all know what we're going to call everything. I don't know. But this is really critical. If you do not manage your terminology, you're going to have structured authoring fail because people are not going to understand what you're talking about. So those are two parts of the three. And obviously, they're very, very interconnected. You really, if you're going to do structure, you really need to manage terminology. But what about this thing called translation memory? And I often find that writers have heard of translation memory, but they're not exactly sure how it works. So let me tell you about translation memory. Translation memory is a database, and it's a database that stores source content and translation. So what happens is the translator gets your content, and if it's the first time it's being translated, that person is going to see each one of your source segments, and there will be no translations existing already. And a segment is a term that's a unit that's used in translation. You can think of it as a phrase. Sometimes a segment is a whole sentence. Sometimes a segment is a phrase, but it's a translatable unit. And when the translator translates it, there's a pair, and actually that's technically a translation unit, is the source segment and the translated segment. And they get married and they live together in the database. And I'll have perhaps English, French, English, German, right? I might have German, Japanese. I can have all different pairs depending upon what my source language was and what the translated language was, okay? So I have this beautiful database. And remember, if I keep sending the same sentences to translation, I only ever have to translate it once because it's already in the translation memory. If I send click OK, and that's in the translation memory, and then I say press the OK button, that is not in the translation memory. That's not even close. We only have one word in common, even though the intent of the instruction is identical. That's the way translation works. How many words can I match with what is already in my translation memory? Because the next time you send content to translation, the translation interface, if you've ever seen what it looks like on a translator's screen, what happens is it takes the source content and it populates a table with each segment, and then it goes to the translation memory and tries to find a matching translation to populate the next column. So it's all rows of segments with the source column and the translation column. And it will pull whatever it has found in the translation memory and pre-populate that column, that translation column. And your goal as a writer is to give translation the same exact sentence, the same way, every single time, because you don't have to pay to have those words translated again. Okay? So if you have questions about TM, jot them down. We can talk more about TM, but that's how TM works. And TM, translation memory, was such a huge step in translation technology. It's hard for me to even explain what a huge step this was. So all translation technology really bases itself on translation memories, except for machine translation, which works differently. But the whole cycle of how a translator works. So when I send source content and I send it to translation, the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to check my translation memories to see what already exists. And then it's going to add all of the translations for all the new stuff into the TM, and then you'll end up with your fully translated content, your chunk, your topic, whatever. It will be a combination of what was in the TM and what's new, and the translator just put into the TM. So here's the deal, and here's what I've been trying to get companies and technology vendors to understand. If I already have something that's translated and it's in the TM, what I really need to do is I need to be able to push the English source that's already been translated back to the writer. Because I don't know about you, but I don't remember what I wrote 10 minutes ago. Never mind what someone else wrote 3 months ago that's already been translated into 72 languages. So I need technology to look and tell me in my source content to say, oh, you know, you're saying press on the OK button, but I actually have click OK. So I'm going to tell you, you know, instead of saying press the OK button, you should use click OK because it's already been translated. I need to push that back. I need to round trip this information so that I have my content chunks. I'm standardizing my terminology so everybody can understand the English. I have my translation memories, which is storing my source and translated segments. And it's a full circle. I'm populating and repopulating. There is such a magic dance that happens when I can do this. The amount of money I save on translation gets into very big dollars very quickly. The consistency I can get in my source content and in my translated content is exponentiated because I'm always using the stuff that's already been translated. And this is completely foreign to most writing departments because, localization's over there. They don't, they're in a different campus. I once had a customer where localization was a different campus from the writing group. It wasn't just like a different floor of the building. It wasn't just like a different building. I had to get in my car and drive. It was ridiculous. So now I've got my dog and my Shen and my parrot and my hund and whatever, and everybody's always saying the same thing. I'm walking the dog, I'm feeding the dog, I'm brushing the dog, and if I have, cleaning the dog, and I say cleaning the canine or whatever, either my terminology management system is going to catch it because I used the wrong word, or my translation memory can catch it because I used the wrong sentence. So we can put it all together. I use structured authoring. I write it once, I use it many times. I translate it once, I use it many times. I use a terminology management system to say the same thing the same way every single time. We all agree on the terms we're going to use. And then I use my translation memory system to be able to use already translated, this should actually say segments because it's terms and segments, in your source content and push that back to the authors. So now everything is in alignment in every language, and my content should be less expensive to create, less expensive to translate, quicker to market. All of those great, cheaper, better, faster things should happen when I have all three of these technologies working together in, I like to call it a well choreographed ballet. So that's the trifecta. You can call it a trinity, but I did not want to offend anybody. I thought about using the word trinity, but somebody would have been offended. Trust me. Yeah. Trust me. Someone would have been offended. So, questions that I might be able to address.
I guess I do kind of have one to start things off, Val. Say it's just two words that have identical meanings but are very different, like the suggestions or the ones that you brought up before, click and press. Translated into 72 different languages, how much would that rack up to as far as like the cost of additional costs that potentially the customer could have saved if they just stuck with the one term?
So it really depends. It depends on how many languages you're translating into and how expensive each language is. So the way, that's Moose squeaking a toy. So the way translation is priced is that you pay by the word, and different languages cost different amounts. So French or Italian or German or Spanish is going to be your least expensive. And, it also depends on the quantity. The larger the quantity you send, the cheaper they'll give you as a price per word. But let's just say that will be about 9 or 10 cents a word. If you're translating into some very esoteric African language that, only 6 people know how to translate into, it could cost you 40 cents a word to translate that. So it's really going to depend on how many words are different, what languages they're different in, and how much content you're sending. And the bottom line is, how much per word are they going to charge you? So that was a very long answer.
That's fine. It was a kind of big question, to be fair, but that is still really interesting. I've got another one, but I'll wait until we've had a couple more folks to go. Anybody else have any questions?
Yes, this is Nikki. Hi. Yes. Now, what you're calling terminology management is typically what, I've worked at 2 companies that had, structured authoring. And one of the things was we had to use a specific style guide. We did not have a choice about saying click the OK button or press it or whatever. We said click OK, whatever Microsoft said, you know, or something like a option button, you know, select, not click the such and such radio button. So, and, you know, we didn't call it terminology though. Now terminology, I usually thought of as, okay, we only have one word for this, per concept or thing. You know, you never have two words that mean the same thing or one word that can mean two different things. I mean, that's a real no-no. But that's how I've been used to thinking of terminology. So where does a style guide fit in this source terminology management? It seems like, you know, say a click, you know, where does that fit?
Great. It's a good question. So some companies put term lists into their style guides. Some companies combine their term lists in their style guides. And some companies keep them separate. Usually, a style guide really is about the rules of how you're going to use the words that everybody has agreed to use. It's really what a style guide usually is. It's really the grammar and the style choices that you're making. So can we use passive voice, yes or no? Are we going to use contractions? Are we always going to use contractions, or are we never going to use contractions, or are we just going to kind of leave it loose and you can and you can't, and that's fine? Often you'll find the term list in there as a section. Other companies choose to manage their terminology in a different place. I often see terminology managed in a spreadsheet where style guide is managed in, you know, a Word doc or some other kind of document.
Okay, so I'm just saying, when I'm thinking terminology, by that, do you mean like a translatable thing like click OK? Okay, is that a term that would be in a terminology management system?
It could be.
Okay, yeah, again, I'm just
It could be.
Because again, most of the style guides that I've been with, I've never worked with a terminology management system, okay? But we had the style guide and it definitely said things, I mean, it defined things like you're talking about, like say, click OK. And we were supposed to say, click the OK button, which is what it says in Microsoft Manual of Style at that time, right? And, you know, and we were very strict about things like that for the very reason that you mentioned, the translation. But I had never thought of using a terminology management system to manage things like that. That's very interesting.
So, yeah, so from a software perspective, most of the time, the systems that you're going to look at that are going to help you manage your English source terminology so that your writers have access to it are also going to include managing all of your style and grammar rules, that it's not going to be separated, that it's going to be in one system. It's just that there are different software components that work together in those systems, and terminology is usually one component of the systems, and style and grammar is another, and sometimes tone of voice is another. And it's really all, what is the software acting upon? In terminology, the software is acting upon a word or perhaps a compound word. And style and grammar are acting on a sentence, and voice and tone are acting on a paragraph. So it's all sort of the unit of specificity It's amazing. I remembered that word at 8 o'clock at night. It's a unit of, at my age, it's a unit of specificity and what is the software acting upon. When you're not using a system, people tend to glob it all together. And that's fine as long as you're paying attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic.
Can I revisit that question? Are there specific tools, software tools? Like, can you give us the names of common tools that are used for those two functions, for translation memory, terminology management?
Yeah, so there are really, I'm going to say there are 4 tools on the market. They don't all have all the same functionality. Full disclosure, Content Rules is a reseller and service provider for Acrolinks and for Congri. So those are 2 of the tools.
What's the
There's
other one?
also
Acrolinks and what?
Acrolinks.
I know.
I've heard of that one. What's
Congri, I believe you said it was, Val?
Congri, C-O-N-G-R-E-E.
Okay.
Congri is a direct competitor to Acrolinks. It's a very similar tool.
Okay.
Each tool has certain things that it does better than the other one. So depending upon your environment, I might recommend one over the other. You know, we'd have to get into the details of exactly what you need, but they are both tools that allow you to manage all of these things. A third one would be HyperSTE. HyperSTE was designed for simplified technical English, and it's still out there. And then a fourth one to the party, and it's not exactly the same, and I'll be honest, I don't know a lot about it. It's called Cordoba, I think it's Q-O-R-D-O-B-A, Cordoba. That one doesn't pop up quite as much, but, you know, I have to mention it if I'm going to be like an equal opportunity presenter. So, you know, obviously I work a lot with Acrolinks and with Congri, and, you know, we've been working with Acrolinks for about 15 years. It's a long, long time. We've been working with Congri for not quite a year. Congri has been in Germany for a long, long time. They've made their English US debut much more recently, and it's a good tool too. They're both really good tools. I highly recommend both of them, and depending on your needs, you might lean to one or the other.
I'd like to add something to that. In my experience, there were a couple companies that I worked for that did translate a lot of content, but when they were converting their into content management systems, they didn't want Acrolink because it was quote unquote too expensive, $25,000 a year. At least that's what it was 10 years ago. So I'm just wondering if you have ways of persuading people the value proposition of Acrolinks. You know, this is a really good way of saying it, because I would have loved it had a tool like Acrolinks, so I wouldn't have to go back. Okay, now is it click the button or select it? You know, I didn't have to think. So anyway, just want to say that.
Yeah. So making a business case for any of these tools, you know, your upper management is going to see these kinds of tools as luxury items. It's not going to see these tools, you know, they're going to say, hey, we hired, you know, professional writers. They should be doing this on their own. And they don't really understand that we don't have time to check the style guide every 15 minutes. We just don't have time.
Yeah.
So when we look at an ROI, it's all about the ROI. It's all about either saving them money or making them money. It's the only argument that will work. You can talk until you're blue in the face about quality, and they're not going to care. They only care about money. So when you make a business case that's based on ROI, yes, you really want to examine what are your current translation costs, what's your current spend, how much money could you save if you stopped sending translation different things. You always send them the same thing. So how much of your content is currently being translated based on fuzzy match and the percentage of fuzzy match? But there's so many other things as well that people forget. For example, how much time does it take to look something up in the style guide? You've got 30 writers, you pay them all, you know, I don't know, whatever a writer makes now, 90K, 100K a year, whatever, 120K a year, and you've got 30 of them, and it takes each, you know, every time I have to look something up in the style guide, because I can't memorize the style guide, right? Every time I have to look something up, it takes me 15 minutes to find the style guide, never mind to look and find the page. And in terminology, most of the time I'm going to be looking for a term and it's not even going to be in there. I will have wasted all my time. So start really adding up what this is costing and start really adding up what it costs in-country review. If you keep sending different sentences to translation and they keep translating it differently, you've got 78 people, one per language, that has to now review your new sentence that should have been the same sentence to begin with. How much are we paying each one of those 78 people? Because nobody has the job of in-country reviewer. You're taking someone away from their job to review something that someone has written and has been translated and has to go to in-country review because somebody's got to check and make sure it says the right thing. So the expense is more than 10 cents a word. The expense, when you start getting down to really the time it takes to do this versus the amount you're going to spend on a tool, the numbers do become compelling.
I know, it really takes the place of at least one low-level editing function, you know? I mean, that's just have in-country review is. By the way, I just wanted to say,
Nikki, maybe we put a hold on that for a moment and maybe let another person ask a question real quick.
Okay, sure. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. You can continue that in a second. Anybody else have any questions? Oh, Joe, you're muted if you were trying to ask something.
There, you should hear me now.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, good. For translation memory, you talked about breaking the language samples down into segments. How is it determined what makes a segment? Are there rules? Are there algorithms? Are there writers' sensibilities? Is there a consistent way to decide what's a segment?
Probably not the same in all languages either.
Yeah, so are you talking about the source or are you talking about the translation?
You talked about segments in terms of translation memory, and yes, it would be the segment in the source.
Okay, so normally the way it's going to work is it's going to be done on a percentage of words matched. That's the standard algorithm. The standard algorithm is you've given me a segment, it has 10 words, how many words, you know, I'm going to look for that segment in the database. I'm going to pull out all of the segments that have words in common with it. And I'm going to find the segment that has the most number of words in common with it. Unfortunately, most of these systems do not look at intent, at meaning and intent.
Yeah,
meaning and intent. That's what I was
wondering about.
Yeah, meaning and intent is definitely a natural language processing AI function. And companies have tried and failed miserably, and I've lived through it, at trying to take a source English sentence and find an equivalent using meaning and intent. So is click OK the same as press on the OK button?
Mm-hmm.
It's meaning and intent because we only have one word in common. And right now, it's still a fuzzy match world. I am hoping that as natural language processing continues to mature, we'll be getting better and better at having systems be able to look at a sentence, go, oh, they're trying to tell you you need to do something with the button over there. And all of these 27 different ways, they all mean the same thing, even if they only have the word okay in common. We're not there yet. I haven't seen that happen yet. But that would be the goal.
Okay, but you're saying it's based just on looking for the number of matching words.
That's the way it
For example, if you have
works
a,
now.
yeah, because if you have a string of 10 words, or maybe only 8 should be a phrase, or excuse me, a segment, or what if somewhere along the line you knock off the last half of a phrase over pick this instead of pick this up. So I'm wondering if there are, yeah, grammatical rules or anything like that. It sounds like no.
You know, when you're doing this kind of compare between either source language and translated language, or even source language, two different segments that mean the same thing, it's unfortunately, the assumption is that you've provided two segments that are grammatically correct.
Okay.
So it's a separate function. And that's tough. It is tough. This is not a perfected science at this point, but it's getting a lot better.
Surprised.
Yeah, but we're better than we were 10 years ago. I can tell you that. So, other questions?
I have one more. I put it in the chat box. Does your book describe how to make a business case for one of these tools? Or perhaps you might have this information on your website.
I'm thinking.
You know, information on a business case. That's all.
My book on global content strategy does describe more about translation memory and saving money in translation and standardizing your source content. I don't have something that documents, like with a, example case study. I mean, it's a great idea. An example, even a made up case study, because no company will let you write a case study about them, but even a made up case study, it's a great idea. The person who really ought to do that is Mark Lewis, because he is the man who can calculate all these things. I think he and I once discussed that, but I don't know that it went anywhere. The biggest problem we have is that usually we're talking about saving money in localization by spending money in documentation.
Right.
And unless you have a VP who's above both, you have to be a really strong personality to really get everybody to listen to you, because TechDoc doesn't want to spend money so that translation can save money. They're a different budget. You really everybody needs to play together nicely, but it's really hard the way companies budget. But it's a good idea. It's a really good idea, because there's lots of places to look. We didn't even start talking about the cost of a support call. We didn't even go there in 78 languages.
Right.
Val, what's the name of your book? Sorry.
Say again?
I'm sorry, I thought you were done. I was just asking for the name of your book.
Yep. Oh,
I'll turn it off
the
in
name
that
of,
real quick.
no, that's the book I'm writing. The book that I'm talking about is one that I already published. It's called Global Content Strategy, a Primer. So that one I published a few years ago.
Thank you.
It should be updated. The section on machine translation does not include neural NP. I've been meaning to update it, but I just got distracted by my new book. So, you know, it's a new shiny, bright object. So it's hard to update an existing book. It's like, I'm done with that one already. This is a new one. So, so yeah, back to that business case. There are lots of places to look, lots and lots of places. Can we put a price on brand degradation? Can we put a price on that? Can we find out from marketing what's the cost if people start getting unhappy with the brand? You know, what's the cost of that? There is a cost. How do we find out what that cost is? You know, do they know? Do they have experience with that? Has it happened? Will they tell you if it's happened? So lots of places to look.
Patrick, you had a question?
I had a question. This is just a little bit on reuse, and it's experience I had years ago before most of this came up, but with a manual when they had just begun to start putting together with computers. And in this manual, and it's a long time, so I've forgotten the exact question, but I was trying to look something up in the manual, and I could look it up in the index, and it referred to me 3 or 4 pages. And in each place I looked, the writer had cut and pasted his same paragraph into each of the places where I looked up to try to find the explanation I couldn't understand. And so in other words, if somebody had been writing along, maybe they would have explained something slightly differently in different places and given me half a chance to understand what I was trying to find. But by reusing the same piece of text in every place, they had simply duplicated the thing I didn't understand to begin with.
So the problem is they didn't explain it well to begin with. If they had explained it well once, then you wouldn't need 4 or 5 other explanations. So the problem is in the review of the original content.
Right.
If the original content is not good, then we have a problem everywhere, and that's true. So the onus is on the writer and the reviewers knowing I'm only describing this once. You know, okay, folks, I'm doing it one time. You get one time to make sure I got this right.
Right.
We're going to write it once. We're going to review it. We're going to edit it. We're going to publish it. And it's got to be right because we only get one chance.
There you go.
And it's going everywhere.
Good. I agree with that.
Yep, agree. Absolutely agree. Yep.
You got any further questions?
Going once. Going twice. Ding, 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 ding.
I think it's sold. All right. Well, Val, thank you so much again for coming and sharing this with us. Everybody, can we get a round of applause for Val?
Thanks a lot. That was great.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, and it was great to see everybody. I'll turn my camera on momentarily just so I can say hello. Hi, here I am.
Hi.
I'm really here. So, and dinner's ready, so we'll go eat dinner.
Sounds like a good plan.
Thank you so much.